one. Hi, my name's Dallas Delahanty, and I'm going to be giving you a youth perspective on the Ukraine crisis. I have with me...
I'm Curtis Russell. I will be our voice of reason amongst these three.
Sure. Yeah. And then we also have...
Josh Teeter. I'm going to be, I would say, kind of a moderate or maybe moderator between these two extremists.
Is it really extremist if we're both on the same side, though? That's the question.
Well, it could be.
And then we'll obviously be talking about the Ukraine crisis, which I'm sure anyone who found this podcast somehow already knows about. We're currently talking about this about 5 to 10 minutes before the ultimatum given by Russia is going to come to fruition, so we're going to kind of be keeping informed on that as well, but I figure we'll just give our initial thoughts right now before swinging right into it. So, Curtis, you want to give your thoughts at the moment?
As of right now, there's no new information that I have, except for that I am reading from a letter sent by Ukraine to the United Nations requesting that action be taken. A draft law on annexation of Crimea was registered in the Russian parliament on the 2nd of March. And the Russian armed forces have moved against Ukrainian soldiers using stun grenades in an attempt to seize Ukrainian tactical places. I currently have the opinion that nothing's going to come of this, that after the initial panic dies down, Russia's going to take Crimea and everything's going to settle back down to where it was.
Yeah, but I guess the question would be, do you expect Russia to annex Crimea, or do you expect them to make it a puppet state, in your opinion?
I personally have the opinion that they're probably going to annex it. I think that while they could probably get away with much more easily having it as a satellite state, the Russian people and Putin himself wouldn't be satisfied with that. They would want to annex it directly rather than just having it there.
Okay, well...
Yeah, well, can we talk to about Putin for a second? Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
In my research... You have something to say, Josh?
Yeah, let's be real here. Ukraine and Crimea have always been satellite states of Russia. So, yeah.
They'd be just fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, they've been that way for, since pre-Soviet, during Soviet, and after Soviet, so...
Yeah. So, but as I was saying, Putin himself, in some of the research I did, he's not as dumb as people are making him out to be. Guy has a PhD in economics, of all things, from, while his defense of the dissertation probably wasn't extreme because he ruled the country at the time, still doesn't make the fact that what he's kind of doing any less. So it's not a dumb guy here. We're talking a quote from a Republican congressman said something along the lines of, it's like it's like Putin's playing chess and we're playing marbles.
I don't necessarily, while he's intelligent, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that, yes, we don't look necessarily as intelligent because of the fact that we're tripping over our own democracy. But I think the thing that you have to recognize here is that Putin's his motivations are much less complicated than ours. Our motivation is we want to protect other states while protecting ourselves, while preventing any sort of nuclear war. His motivations, he just wants the land and the power that comes with Crimea. So I think that one of the things we need to realize is, well, as Angela Merkel said, Putin's lost touch with reality. And that's something that I think we need to keep in mind as we're going through these discussions.
Alright. Again, I think that's true. I have the exact quote here from Chairman Mike Rogers from Fox News. Article name is, Did Russia's Cold Warrior Read Obama Perfectly? And he's like, I think Putin is playing chess, and I think we're playing marbles. I don't even think it's close. He pretty much what the article sums up is, he's pretty much read the situation perfectly. Like, right now, Putin is in a no-lose situation. Either he annexes it, which is good for him. He takes over Ukraine, which is good for him. Or he gets brownie points from the whole, establishment for having restraint and not invading more when he could have. So right now, things could not be going more perfect for Putin and Russia. And as you did mention, Curtis, there's been a draft sent to the parliament about possible annexation. And literally, he's played this about as perfect as it can be played right now, and I'd honestly hate to be on the opposite side of this guy, because our hands are completely tied at the moment about anything we could try to do.
I don't necessarily think that's true. Yes, most of the situations do come out better for him than we might want them to. But I think if he invades, you said that he would earn brownie points with the other nations because he has restraint. I think if he does invade, it'll have quite the opposite effect. I think that he'll lose brownie points with most people for not having the, I guess, the reasonableness to allow the country to remain free. He's going to use force to obtain more power for himself and his country. And I don't think anyone will be so simple-minded as to look at it as a good thing that he's not invading any further. I think they will see the negativity of what he's doing for what it is, rather than the positive of what he could do.
But if we look at the past things that have happened in relation to this, i.e. the Georgia invasion of late 2008, if we simply look at it, he got away with pretty much the same thing in Georgia, and no bad things happened. He got away with it completely free, and pretty much what happened was he, in effect, got away with invading another country, because guess what? He didn't annex the entire country, and we let him go for that, and now he has part of Georgia under his control. I mean, looking at just the past performances of the EU and the UN and NATO and all those establishments, as long as you're not going full dictator mode, which he hasn't really done yet, I'd say that him showing restraint, well, I wouldn't necessarily clarify it as single-mindedness. We're in an age where no one wants a war, and it'll be seen almost like Hitler appeasement, where it's like, hey, this is good, but whether it turns out good, no one's really sure of yet.
Well, if you guys don't mind if I interject here,
Go right ahead.
personally, I view Putin in this situation as the good guy, actually. I think, in this case, Putin doesn't really plan. I don't think he plans at all to annex Crimea unless the people of that area democratically vote, seeing as that they have split off from the central Ukrainian government in Kiev. I don't think he's planning to annex or honestly take over any part of it myself. I don't think.
Do you mind if I interject real quick?
No, it's fine.
I'm up on CNN right now, and it looks like Ukraine decided to not stand down. I haven't seen anything if any shooting has started yet, but reports are saying that there's over 16,000 Russian troops in Crimea, and looks like Ukraine's not going to stand down at the deadline. So now the ball's in Russia's court to see if it was just a bluff, or if they actually make a move towards the military bases.
If I may, I want to come back to your previous statement there, Tosh. Although it's very easy to mistake what he's doing as focusing on the will of the people of Crimea, remember how I would point you back to what Hitler did with Poland. Hitler's main justification for invading Poland, and it's not dissimilar to what Putin's doing today, is he wanted to free the oppressed German people in Poland. That was what he told the world he was doing. And very similarly here, Putin is saying that he wants to help the Russian people in Crimea. And honestly, I think it's just a blatant copy of that strategy, and we need to recognize that, and we need to think about the fact that he just wants to appear the good guy so he can get away with getting more power for himself and for Russia.
I would like to say there's a slight difference in that, as in people of Crimea actually sent to the Russian parliament asking for protection and stability. Because if you remember, a week ago there was bloody riots in the capital, Ukraine. It's not been a stable region, and the government that got instituted is very notoriously anti-Russian. And a lot of Russians in the area, being as Crimea is a very historically Russian place, are fearing for their lives because they're worried about race riots pretty much against Russia.
Yeah,
That's
the government.
actually... Go ahead. Huh?
Yeah, the government that was, I'm not going to say put in place or maybe even, replaced. I'm going to say installed because that's what it was. those rioters, those people, they're not the majority, and they were backed by the EU, and the EU. It's basically an EU installed leader, and the pro-Russian, people of Ukraine and Crimea are fighting against that because it's an installed leader as opposed to the one that was elected democratically. So I think we have to keep that in mind here, is that this wasn't, a people's thing. This was largely the EU that was putting this guy there. Like, this was not under the will of the people of Ukraine or Crimea necessarily.
Yeah, Curtis, you had something you were going to say?
I can't find the exact quote, but I found in one of the CNN articles that I read, they talked about exactly what Putin's reasoning was, and that he said that there were there was oppressed Russian citizens in Crimea, and what the CNN article said is that after some some initial surveying of the Russian majority in Crimea, there's no evidence of oppression of that Russian majority. There's not necessarily any signs of the fact that Russian majority, as I mentioned, is being oppressed as Putin would like us to think it is.
I never read anything about exactly oppressed, but in the articles I did read, it was more like there was a fear of backlash against Russia because the new government put in place is extremely anti-Russian. Take, for instance, a very anti-Irish prime minister being put into the UK, then I guarantee there'd be worried by Northern Ireland that there would be a backlash against them. Same sort of system, I guess not exactly the same, but you get what I'm trying to say. And, they're really, really worried that, they're going to be, hunted and, possibly lose their rights because of how anti-Russian, all these people are. So I wouldn't say Putin's justified. I obviously don't have any more details than CNN, Fox, or the multiple news sites, such as the World Bulletin and the Telegraph and BBC, have, which are all, if you keep in mind, propaganda machines, so we have to take all this with a grain of salt. But it's all really pointing to one of the two facts that, he's, in so much as I've read that there are reports that the Russian people of Russian heritage, that's what I was looking for, are looking for Putin and asked him to come because they were worried about possible backlash from this new installed government.
You have to recognize that in a context like this, anything that's said, as you said, has to be taken with a grain of salt. Even and especially things that back any one specific side that can't necessarily be refuted or proved specifically. I say this because it's not because I wish to immediately discount what's being said by those in Crimea that they asked for Putin to come, but that more specifically that you need to consider that it's very, very possible that those people are Russians, and by Russians I do not mean Russian denomination people in Crimea, from Crimea, that they are actually people from Russia in Crimea attempting to make Putin's actions seem reasonable. Yes, there is some evidence that it might have been influenced by something like that, but you can't discount that all of the world leaders are in it, that his actions could very well lead to a full-blown war. Like, if this isn't very carefully handled and considered, when you have that many armed people in a small space, or even in a single city, not necessarily in a small space, there's bound to be conflict if you leave it in that situation for long enough. So even if Russia decides to extend their ultimatum, which, by the way, Putin will not do, in my opinion, I think he will believe that's a sign of weakness and will therefore push the moment he realizes that they're not appeasing him.
But Russia on the ultimatum or deadline, Russia is saying that the news was released by Ukraine. They're saying that it's just a load of baloney. Russian defense minister, this is on Russian Times, so again, we might as well get both sides of the story. Russian defense minister dismisses Ukraine ultimatum reports as total nonsense. So we're pretty much looking at a he said, she said with possible nuclear balance, or with a possible thermonuclear war in the balance, which is
Yeah, people are already
a little extreme, but
talking nuke strikes.
I mean, you gotta look at it. I read earlier today there was a report of someone wrote a book called The Next 100 Years, I think, and in it he predicted that there would be a second Cold War around this time period, and pretty much I feel bad for any world leader in this exact situation because it's an unwinnable position from any side against Russia at this point.
Once again, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that what needs to happen is that there needs to be some discussion and some unity between the non-Russian powers. I think that if the UK and the EU are willing to band together, and when I say EU, recognize I don't necessarily mean the institution, but I mean what the institution represents. Each of the member states and each of the
so Europe, in effect.
Yeah, Europe in effect.
If Europe can band together,
if Europe and America can, NATO can manage to work together, I think that a lot of this can blow over in a much more peaceful and a much less detrimental way. I think that what you're assuming, Dallas, is that there's going to be no unity, and I think one of the biggest things you're forgetting here is that in the face of a common enemy, it's very difficult for people not to band together. In this sort of situation, people are too proud to lose. So what I think honestly is going to happen is that the U.S. and the European Union are going to put their foot down against what Russia is doing and show them that they cannot get away with everything. I think that there are still enough people in this world who think about and who remember World War II that the governments will not be able to just roll over and let Russia have what they want. They did it once, and I think they're going to. They think this second time is all it's going to take for people to realize. Wait a minute, Georgia and Crimea is not going to be where Putin is happy to stop. This is going to keep going until we stop him.
I mean, I guess there's the argument for that, but do you understand why Russia took Crimea? The strategical reason at least.
It's their biggest warm water port year round.
Deep water as well. Deep water, warm water port, which pretty much means he needs that base. So there's a lot of reports saying he might just stick to Crimea because honestly, that's all he needs.
It's arguable that there were the same sort of comments about Hitler, that there were strategic reasons for him taking Poland and the surrounding nations, that each one had
It'd be more like him taking part of Poland and showing no official signs of him going to attack the rest of Poland.
To be fair, no, you can't say that, because the thing is that there were clear lines between Ukraine and Crimea beforehand. They weren't necessarily as defined as this would make them, but they were still there. There was no huge divisions of Poland as there might have been in this context. That Crimea was already fairly separate. I believe the word that I read was autonomous in comparison to the rest of Ukraine. And that's very different from the situation with Poland, where he invaded. That's not very different, from the situation in Poland, because he took Poland as a sovereign nation, and you could argue that Poland was part of the rest of Eastern Europe. And again, I just don't think you can say that the strategic value of Crimea is enough for him to be satisfied with it. I don't think he will stop until we force him to stop, in the same way that Hitler was not interested in stopping on his own.
But the big problem is a lot of the world leaders, especially if we were to look at our own ruling body, as in the president and mainly his Secretary of State, John Kerry, who I'm sure most of us are at least slightly familiar with, pretty much said all options are on the table, and military options are literally the last case scenario. The trade deficit between the U.S. and Russia was, I think, 15,000, maybe 16,000. I sent you the numbers earlier. So, if we were to say commit a full embargo on Russia, the U.S. would only be losing about, Russia would only be losing about $16,000 in a year. And I think the source for that is census.gov. And pretty much what's going on is simply Russia provides Europe with power. Pretty much, Russia is the main source of oil and gas in almost all of the European Union. So, what the EU won't be able to fully commit to a strike because they risk losing all their power.
Well, you have to keep in mind
And
that the
pretty-
EU doesn't have a military. The EU is a financial institution.
Well, I mean it ambiguously as in Europe won't make an
The
actual
Allied
attack.
forces in Europe.
Or NATO, I guess we could say NATO too.
It's
Yeah,
worth
if
noting
anyone
that-
would be...
NATO even has less authority because pretty much NATO's only in case another NATO nation gets attacked, which Ukraine's not. Now, if Poland was to get attacked,
There'd be a problem.
then, unless Poland attacked first in a unilateral strike, then Poland would be left out on its own. Because people in this generation don't want war. Which is the same ideology that led to the appeasement of Hitler in the first place. I'm not saying the system works, I'm not defending Putin, I'm just getting the full story out there. But there is a chance that exactly what happens is pretty bad.
I think that I want to step back a minute and talk about trade embargo from the United States. That debt is not necessarily everything that Russia will lose because there's more than just the negative balance that matters. Like there's still things that is happening outside of just the loss of money. I think also that if the United States does set up an embargo on Russia, that it sets a precedent that assuming Russia doesn't attack the United States right away, it sets a precedent that other nations are willing to follow in that they can also embargo Russia with impunity. So if the United States does it, it will lead to, in my opinion, one of two results. It will lead to Russia attacking the U.S., or it will lead to a complete embargo on all fronts of Russia in such a way that Russia will be forced to back down from a military standpoint and or from an annexation standpoint. I think a satellite state might be a little bit less embargo worthy, at least in the eyes of our leaders, but I think that there would still be a lot of tension over something like that.
I think
And,
Curtis, that you're thinking of this in kind of in the way, just from the way you've been describing your opinions here, is that the name Putin is synonymous with Stalin, and it's really not that way. Like he's not. I don't think he's that kind of leader, and there's not really very much that suggests that he'll begin a Soviet-style conquest of Eastern Europe and Russia. Or sorry, not Russia, but Asia.
I'm gonna take a step back before I answer that statement directly. Do you know why term limits exist, Tosh?
Yeah, to keep somebody from being in power too long.
And you recognize that the Russian government actually does have term limits.
consecutive term limits.
That Dallas, the ideology behind a consecutive term limit is the same as the ideology behind an absolute term limit. It just allows for more loopholes in the system.
Which is exactly what Putin
Exactly.
did. He ran for 2 terms, took 4 years off to go be prime minister, which means this guy's not going out of power anytime soon. We all got to be
He's
honest
not
here.
going to go out of
Anything short of a revolution.
He's not going to go out of power until he's dead or until he finds something better to do.
Pretty much.
I think that's kind of what you want to pay attention to, Tosh, is that anybody who really believes in the strength and in the fidelity of his government would allow and trust other people to come to power. Putin wants the power for himself, and anyone who's power hungry and who gets away with getting a certain amount of power will want and will take more power. Putin has shown that he's not willing to give up the power he currently has, which is a very obvious and very strong sign that he wants more.
I don't feel like that's true at all, because you could say the same thing about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He took more terms than was the standard at that time, even though it was technically legal under the Constitution. And, people don't say he's a power-hungry guy, like people don't say he was a power-hungry dictator.
If I may.
I don't think we can apply that reasoning at all to Putin.
If I may, FDR never attempted to annex Crimea.
No, we didn't.
Fair point.
That's the point. That's the point, Tosh. Is that if Putin was just taking more terms and was happy with Russia, then I think we just wait for him to pass on, God bless his soul, and be done. The difference is that Putin is attempting to reach out and grab more power than he already has, than his nation has or deserves. So, you really want to consider that when you're talking about that. Is you can't necessarily completely and fairly compare him to someone like FDR, because he's attempting to gain and control more power than he already has and has been taking and keeping in cycling terms in Russia.
I would, could we talk about Putin's previous rise for a minute, if you guys think it's okay?
Yeah.
This guy, honestly, if I was a Russian citizen, after his first term as president, I would have voted for him. He cut, during his first premiership and then presidentship, so from 99 to 2008, real income increased by 2.5 times, wages more than tripled, and both unemployment and poverty more than halved. This guy, while he might be out of touch with reality, as the German Prime Minister said, is a smart guy, and I'd be honestly, this is a bad setup that we've put ourselves in right now. He's according to Forbes magazine, he's ranked as the most powerful man in the world.
I would doubt that.
I
wouldn't either. The difference is, like, you could say that the President of the United States is the most powerful man in the world, but the problem with, like, something like that, if he had absolute power over the United States, then that would be very different. But because power in the United States is so spread out, and in most non-Soviet, non-ex-Soviet countries is so very spread out, Putin is very easily the most powerful man in the world, because there's no one else who has all of that control over everything the way he does. Now you can say...
could I speak again for a sec?
Just a moment. You can say that he has power over... that he has people have a voice, but there's a lot of evidence, and I believe I got this from National Geographic, is there's a lot of evidence that the elections don't actually mean anything. When you said you would vote for him, Dallas, it's very possible that your vote wouldn't actually matter in the election of Putin. There's evidence and belief amongst most allied countries, allied being used just to describe basically non-Russian countries at this point, allied countries that he has been maintaining power not through popular vote, but through just general fixing of the election. And while what he has done for the country could very well, for that country itself, be good, it might not be good for the world as a whole, and it might not actually be as good for his people as it might seem.
No, I know what you're saying. I was just throwing out that at least economically, he's done a very, very good job controlling and managing the economy of Russia. And right now, he was the leader of the United Russian Party. And guess what party has a majority control of the parliament? The party he used to be former leader of. So
Used to be.
they'll vote for. He stepped down for Mendez, the current prime minister, who was the president when he was prime minister. It's really an interesting cycle of them just trading off back and forth. So, pretty much whoever the prime minister is the president, or the leader of the party.
So I'm just looking at a couple articles, some from CNN and some from Russian television. And it seems that Russian media doesn't really have a whole lot to say on the wiseness of Russian actions. And by the way, the Russian parliament did vote on and approve the use of military intervention in Ukraine and Crimea.
I would like to come back to that statement made by National Geographic, because it's not necessarily the comments made by the choices made by the Russian parliament are not necessarily accurate. Anyone who can win the popular vote year after year is not necessarily to be trusted. Think about the fact that even the most loved presidents have in the United States who have the highest Gallup polls results and other such pre-election poll results don't necessarily have a very easy time getting reelected in the United States. They might get reelected, but it's very doubtful they would constantly be reelected year after year. The mob, as it were, is a very fickle thing, and that's something that you want to seriously consider. You want to seriously consider the realism of him getting elected year after year. If you assign a certain probability to him to each person voting for him, that means that the probability of everyone, or of even a majority voting for him, is actually fairly low. And then when you start multiplying that over the course of several years, the probability just gets absolutely ridiculous for him to ever be re-elected that number of times, unless there's something else going on that we don't know about.
Could I interject real
Yes.
quick? The most recent presidential election was a 7-person, 7 main party running. So, it's not the simple 2-party system we're used to here. So, it's a lot more intangibles as far as there's going to be multiple people. So, it's not so much as over 50% of the Russians are voting for him, but more like over 30%.
I feel like
because-
as Westerners, we don't really understand Russian politics quite very well. That's something I'm going to have to look into on my own time there.
I do see it there. I'm not trying to say that Russian politics are necessarily the exact same as United States politics, but still, assuming it's actually a popular vote, or at least some indirect semblance of the same kind of thing, it's very, very unlikely that people would elect Putin year after year unless he made sure that he got elected year after year. It's okay. Stepping away from the whole election and the the virtue or vice of Putin. It's worth noting that the U.S. ambassador to the UN has said, and I quote, "Russian authorities speak as if they are on a human rights protection mission, but that is not what this is." That's that's Samantha Powers on her Ambassador Power Twitter account. So there's nothing else as far as the Telegraph, which has an automatically updating site. There's actually nothing that's come up, and we're almost half an hour past the deadline now.
Continue.
I'm trying to figure out, like, if there's no comments, does that mean that something's happened, or does that mean that nothing's happened and they're waiting for something to happen? I think that there's a lot of things that we need to consider the longer this goes on. Is that, are we missing something here? Like, I just don't think we can trust Putin. I think there's so many things that are just, I think that each thing on its own, like the popular vote, is not necessarily cause in and of itself to distrust Putin. I think that altogether, though, everything cumulatively cannot be ignored. Like, every little thing that adds up to our distrust of him should be considered as a whole, not just on its own.
Alright, so I've been, I think one of the reasons why we haven't had movement yet, or action, is because Russia is still trying to say the ultimatum wasn't true. So I'm thinking that if a smart person was to run the thing, they obviously wouldn't act on the ultimatum once it got out, because it just makes Ukraine look like they're more and more desperate to get support, which will ultimately cut back on popular opinion of them, personally. And right here on CNN's front page, U.S. pulls back on trade talks. All 7 countries of the G7 all backed out of the talks in Sochi for the G8 summit. So right now, Russia's kind of, as far as economically, as far as trade, they're not looking too good because the G7 has all backed out. And it also says here that the cabinet is starting to look at steps towards isolating Russia economically and supposedly militarily, but again, I don't know how exactly. They're probably just talking about training missions.
I think
Your thoughts, Tosh?
I think going back to Curtis's point here. that it may not necessarily be totally what's the word I'm looking for here? Totally a good idea to trust Putin and Russia, as just as a whole here. But I think that's really a past Cold War mentality that we really have to kind of get over just as a nation. And I must remind everybody that is listening to this, and Curtis and Dallas, that the USA, I would argue, has been a worse global influence over the past since the USSR collapsed. I would argue that the USA has been a worse global influence. Think of Iran, Iraq, the Middle East, the whole mess that we've been involved in there. The revolution in Iran was a CIA coup d'etat.
Allegedly.
It's pretty much accepted fact at this point.
Allegedly.
Yeah, sure. And honestly, I don't think, based on what has been heard of Russia and what has been heard of the USA in the past recent years, I don't think that we can take either of them for their word as it is. So, to me, things are looking here like, because think about it. Think about the timing of this, right? So if this thing in Ukraine was a CIA coup d'etat, right? Just assume with me here for a second in this hypothetical situation.
Okay.
That it was. If it was caused by the CIA, the timing could not have been better. Russia was preoccupied with the Sochi Winter Olympics, so if they do something like roll troops and tanks and helicopters into Crimea and contest the installed leader of Ukraine, then they would look bad. If you look at it, it looks an awful lot like some of the power plays that we pulled on Russia in the Cold War, and also some of the power plays that the USSR pulled on us in the Cold War. So, if you think of it that way, the timing could not have been better for that kind of thing for the CIA to do. And I think we need to take that into account, is that this may very well be a CIA coup d'etat, in which case that tips the whole thing out of balance.
Tosh, I think we're gonna have to change your intro to make you the resident conspiracy theorist. Well,
I'd be fine with that. Personally,
you can say that all you want, but if you look at it, it's not unlike some of the stuff we did in the Cold War.
I guess I had never thought about it like that, but I guess I can see what he was saying. I was going through, I was browsing the World News subreddit the past couple days to get kind of like the general consensus from around the world of like what people were thinking and all this stuff. And I heard, I guess I read a few people saying, probably like any good favor Russia got with the Sochi Games, totally gone at this point. So, I guess I agree that with Tosh could be right that the timing honestly couldn't be better to make Russia look terrible.
Well, actually, Dallas, I expected you to be the voice of dissent for this, but I guess I will have to say is that if this was CIA orchestrated, it was very, very badly thought out. Yes, the timing is good. This is probably the best time for something like this to happen, but it's so very easy for Putin to spin this into a victory for Russia in the way that it works. Like, if they wanted this to be a hurt to Russia, they should have made the evidence for this being a humanitarian thing much more easily disproved, this being a humanitarian effort. They should have made it much more obvious that Russia was being unreasonable. They should have made it much more obvious, or attempted to make it much more obvious that the coup d'etat was caused by Russian agents. I think that the way that it was done is done in such a way that it's too much of a tipping point. I think that while, yes, it does have some semblance of something like that, I think that it was done so poorly and so haphazardly in comparison to what the possible fallout is, that there's no way that this is what the U.S. would do. I think that the U.S., if they did this, would set it up. I'm of the personal opinion, at the very least, that they would set it up in such a way as to ensure that it only fell out badly for Russia, rather than allowing there to be so many possible scenarios where Russia does come out ahead of this.
I mean, I'm not saying that this was for sure what happened. I'm just saying I could see, especially for the timing issue. I'm not committed to either side. I mean, it'd be reaching, I'll give it that much. But, it could work. I'm definitely of the opinion that if someone was to, go for it and try to, get it, that'd work. I mean, I don't know for sure, but Tosh definitely does bring up a good theory. And we might just have to keep you as the resident, conspiracy theorist song for the rest of them.
Yeah. Another thing you do have to keep in mind, Curtis, is that the USA does not have a good planning record with coup d'etat type things. For example, Iran, that was horrible.
But those all fell apart long term.
The Iran thing fell apart essentially when the people finally decided to rise up against the brutal dictator that we installed there. You know, similarly, if you look at in situation-wise to Ukraine, eventually the people rose up against that, you know, that dictator that was installed there. But if you look at Ukraine right now, basically, people attend. I'm just looking at this Russian television article here, and it's people attend an anti-government rally in Kiev, and you know, there are conflicting reports on how many people turned out, but police estimated that 6,000 protesters attended the rally. And other sources said anywhere from 20 to 70,000. The biggest figure was reported by AFP. And I think really it's something that we have to consider, that it's looking that like the situation, just not necessarily, you know, like any hard data about this yet. But the situation is looking an awful lot like Iran back in '53.
I was just going to say, I mean, like I said, it could be kind of far-reaching, but
there are two beautiful
I'll grant that
mathematical constructs
it
that talk about
could
something like this.
hold water, though
all,
I
Occam's
can't
razor
speak
of
for
any number
if
of
it does or
possible
not,
solutions,
but
the simplest
it's an
one is probably
interesting
the
theory
answer.
that I
And in
personally
this
hadn't
case, the
thought of
simple
yet.
solution is that Putin wants to make a move
What
out
were you
into
gonna
the
say,
world.
Curtis?
He's not satisfied with what he wants, and that meshes really well with human nature. I think the other mathematical thing is Bayesian in nature, in that the more constraints you add to a problem, the more mathematically improbable that solution becomes. So in talking about a U.S. Or a CIA revolution in Ukraine, you have to recognize that there are a lot of constraints and a lot of complexity that comes with that. Making it less and less probable the more and more you think about it, just from a purely probabilistic perspective. No, that's not necessarily to say that it's not true, but that's to say that you should assign it in your head less overall weight. I think that it's not necessarily a completely discountable idea, because your points are very relevant, Tosh, that there is a very high possibility, or at least a very high similarity of it being to Iran in similar situations, but there's so many other things that it could be, and that it is more likely to be, that you can't necessarily say definitively that is what it is. It's worth considering, but it's just, it doesn't mesh well with the other number of options. That there are so many other options it could be, that that's just too complicated an answer for you to accept as your first choice.
Yeah. I do see what you're saying there with the with probability and math wise, it's not terribly probable. But I don't necessarily agree with the most simple option that you proposed. That was basically that Putin wants to rebuild essentially the old Soviet Empire. I don't think that's the most simple option. I think basically if we just take the old proverb, follow the money, to heart here and look at maybe why this whole thing started. Basically, the EU, which is a financial institution, just for everybody that doesn't know, is an attempt by Western, Northwestern, and some parts of Eastern Europe to create a more stable currency, a more stable fiat currency, for the modern age, as compared to all of the European nations having smaller, fragmented, less valuable currencies. And essentially here, what the offer from the EU to Ukraine was that you join the EU, you accept the euro, you get rid of the Russian ruble, and you gain the benefits of the economy of being in the EU and that kind of thing. But while that boosts the currency value, theoretically, of the euro, and in theory, although it hasn't necessarily turned out that way over the past 20, 30 years, it would be better for most all of Europe that was part of the EU. Russia isn't part of the EU. So if, Ukraine, which at the time, or, still is officially using the Russian ruble, if they withdraw from that pact with Russia of using that currency, then the Russian ruble drops in price. It drops in value, per se. And if we look at the money, this is, if we look at the money, if we just look at the numbers, like the data here, in terms of what kind of figures were being thrown around when the Ukrainian parliament, the Ukrainian government voted on this, they decided to stay with Russia, and they didn't, they decided not to go with the EU. And right after that, there was these riots that started after the democratic vote was to go with Russia. And if we look at the money here, basically, what this leads me to believe, at the very least, is that the EU funded, backed, supported these riots in an attempt to boost their own economic situation, because it's currently being dragged down by people like Greece that are in the EU.
That's a fair assessment. I have about one more thing. I found a news article, and then I guess we could probably wrap this up with our final thoughts on the subject, if that's okay with you two.
Good with
that. Russia has apparently deployed, according to the news article, Cressy.pl, warning it is in another language. I'm using a translation. Russia deployed 3,500 troops and heavy equipment on Baltic coast in Kaliningrad Oblast near Polish and Lithuanian borders. So I guess, what do you guys think about that? I'll read part of the article while you can talk just about the headline.
Deployed them where again?
Baltic coast near Poland and Lithuanian borders. Looks like T-72 tanks and BMP-2 armored vehicles. under the guise of a military drill.
Near Polish and Lithuanian borders.
In
Is that part of Russia?
Kaliningrad.
Kaliningrad? Is that part of Russia there?
Let me check out a picture of it real quick.
Where's that?
Yeah, I want to say.
It looks like it. It looks to be a part of Lithuania.
This has been actually very successful, but it looks like we're coming right up against time. I think we're, as far as future episodes go, we'd like to try and do this weekly, unless.
So is this going to be like Civ 5, where they get betrayed, right? Definitely.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
I think we could probably do that. I'd say we have about 5 minutes left, so I say we just give our final thoughts on the whole subject, and then we can kind of just go from there, if that's okay with you two.
This is an organized talk.
Curtis, you want to start with your final thoughts on the situation, just overview and what you think?
But money and power are the two biggest motivators, and I think that for people like Putin, who are willing to do whatever it takes to get power, because I'm betting what Putin does to stay in power isn't necessarily cheap. Touching back on my idea of he cannot have stayed in power naturally, I think that it's very, very possible that, and most likely, just probabilistically, that it's Putin that's doing this, and it's the force behind all of this. That the money is not big enough to the monetary loss will not be big enough to dissuade him from taking Crimea by force if he must. Tosh, would you like to speak of your final thoughts next?
Yeah. I'm just kind of looking at this this map here, and it looks very possibly like Putin doesn't see this as something that he's going to necessarily, be able to do. He's definitely expecting some kind of counter invasion by maybe NATO or UN forces even. If it comes down to that, of course, they can just veto everything. Because we don't really have allies necessarily in the south of Russia. We don't have any allies there. We don't have any allies in the north of Russia because there's nothing to the north of Russia. We're not really on great terms. We don't have open border pacts and things like that with Norway, Sweden, and Finland. The only way that the U.S. could lead a counter invasion of this kind of action is basically through Germany and Poland under NATO, and it looks like he's strategically positioning troops to halt that in case that does happen. But I'm of the opinion that Putin definitely knows what he's doing, and that Putin is actually the good guy here. So that's how I'm looking at it.
I guess I'll give my final thoughts real quick. It's interesting situation that I think I can speak for all of us when I say we hope it gets resolved peacefully. But looking at it, it's definitely looking like there might be a possible need, because a lot of people are drawing similarities to Hitler and Nazi Germany. And I just you guys have spoke pretty much on all the issues, and it's looking at this, if NATO is to strike, it's not going to look good for us, because the North Atlantic Treaty is a self-defense, so we'd have to wait until, say, Poland was attacked. And there's no real precedent for trying to use NATO offensively, and this whole situation has got it really interested. I I would like to maybe come back
we'll
next
discuss it over
week
the course of
and
the next couple weeks.
see what similarities we could draw.
We will try
If the
and get this
situation's still
posted,
going on, and we can find another
not necessarily recorded,
situation
every
based
Thursday.
on
So our
the
information
Cold
will be
War
just
and
a few days out of date.
the interactions that were caused during that, and draw
for us to
similarities to this
discuss,
current
post in the
situation.
comments below.
If you two are fine with doing
we will
that for the
start
next
setting
topic.
up better contact methods and better ways for you to submit ideas and submit thoughts on our discussions as time goes on. But for now, that'll be it for me, unless anyone else has anything they want to add.
This has been a youth perspective on the situation. Thank you for listening. We hope we can do this again next time. Bye.